My roommate looked me dead in the eye and said, "I need you to pretend to be my ex tonight," like she was asking me to grab milk on the way home. Not my boyfriend. Not my date. My ex. There's a difference, and I didn't understand how big a difference until I was standing in her cousin's backyard 3 hours later, telling a room full of strangers about a breakup that never happened, to a woman I had never actually dated, while wanting very badly to change that. My name is Eli Hartman. I'm 29, I install and service HVAC systems for a mid-sized company outside Denver, and for the better part of 2 years I have lived with a woman named Maddie Sloan in a 2-bedroom apartment that smells faintly of her candles and my protein powder, which she calls an unholy combination and I call Tuesday. Maddie and I were never supposed to mean anything to each other beyond rent and groceries. We met through a roommate finder app that I'm pretty sure exists specifically to pair up people who would otherwise never survive a Tinder date with each other. She needed someone who wouldn't steal her snacks. I needed someone who wouldn't throw parties at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. We met for coffee, talked for 40 minutes about nothing, and signed a lease 2 weeks later like two people closing a business deal. That's all it was supposed to be. A business deal with shared Wi-Fi. Except 2 years is a long time to share a kitchen with someone. You learn things you didn't ask to learn. You learn that she sings off-key in the shower and refuses to acknowledge it. You learn she cries during dog food commercials, but stays completely composed during actual sad movies. You learn the sound of her laugh when she's genuinely amused versus the sound she makes to be polite, and somewhere in there, without my permission, I started keeping a quiet, careful tally of every time I got the first one instead of the second. I never said anything. There were rules to this kind of living arrangement, unspoken ones, the kind you don't write into a lease, but understand anyway. You don't make it weird. You don't ruin a good roommate situation by catching feelings for the person who knows what your toothbrush looks like. So I didn't. Or at least, I told myself I didn't, the way people tell themselves a lot of convenient things. Maddie had history. Real history, the kind that leaves marks. She'd dated a guy named Trevor for almost 3 years, all through her last stretch of nursing school, and from what I gathered in late-night kitchen conversations over reheated leftovers, Trevor was the kind of charming that curdles the longer you're around it. He was good at making her feel small in rooms full of people who loved her. He'd correct her stories at dinner parties. He'd laugh just a little too hard when she made a mistake in front of his friends. Nothing dramatic enough to point it directly, just enough to leave her quieter than she used to be by the time she finally ended it, about 8 months before I moved in. Her family, though, they hadn't fully caught up. Not because anyone was lying to them exactly. Maddie just hadn't found the right moment to sit her extended family down and explain that the boyfriend they'd met at 2 Thanksgivings and 1 cousin's wedding was no longer a feature of her life. Her mother still asked about him sometimes. Her grandmother sent her a photo of Trevor's mother at the grocery store like it was breaking news. And every year, Maddie's cousin Renee threw a big family barbecue at the start of summer that functioned less like a party and more like a census of everyone's romantic status, conducted loudly by people holding plates of potato salad. This year, Renee's barbecue fell on a Saturday in June, and Maddie had been dreading it since April. "It's not that I'm embarrassed about being single," she told me one night, sitting cross-legged on the kitchen counter while I made dinner. "It's that being single at Renee's barbecue means answering the same 4 questions from 9 different relatives, and one of those relatives is my Aunt Pam, who once asked me in front of everyone if I'd let myself go because I switched from contacts to glasses. Brutal woman, I said. She peaked in 1996 and she's never recovered." I laughed, because that was usually my job in these conversations, laughing at exactly the right moments so she'd keep talking. But that night she got quiet in a different way, stirring nothing in particular with her fork, and I knew something else was coming. "There's also going to be Trevor," she said. I stopped chopping. Trevor as in capital T, the ex-Trevor? His sister married into the family 2 summers ago. He comes to everything now. It's a whole thing. She rubbed her temple like the headache had already arrived early out of respect. And last year at this same barbecue, he spent 20 minutes telling everyone how well he's doing now, how his new girlfriend is in med school, how stable he feels, Like he was giving a TED talk on personal growth that was somehow also a subtle obituary for me. That's unbelievably petty. He's a petty man in a nice button-down shirt. It's his whole brand. She finally looked up at me, and there was something nervous underneath the joke now, something she was working up to. He's bringing her again this year. The med school girlfriend. And my family is going to spend the entire afternoon comparing us, and I am going to be standing there alone, getting asked why I'm still single, while Trevor narrates his glow-up to an audience of people who raised me. I set down the knife. Okay, so don't go. I have to go. Renee will actually disown me. There's a clause in our family constitution. Then go and ignore it. Eli. She said my name like she was about to ask for something heavier than it sounded. What if I didn't go alone? I should have seen it coming. In hindsight, it was obvious, the kind of setup you only recognize once you're already standing in the middle of it. But at the time, my brain did the thing it always did around Maddie when a conversation got close to something real, which was assume the most boring, least personal explanation possible. You want me to come as backup, I said. Like emotional support. Kind of. Not exactly. She took a breath. I want you to come as my ex. I actually laughed because it seemed like a setup for a joke I hadn't heard the second half of yet. Your ex. Not your boyfriend. Your ex-boyfriend. Hear me out. She held up both hands like she was defusing something. If I show up with a new boyfriend, that's a whole production. Everyone interrogates the new guy, asks how we met, asks about your intentions, asks if you're going to propose by Christmas. My grandmother once asked one of Renee's actual fiancés about his 5-year financial plan over a plate of deviled eggs. I'm not putting you through that. Okay, so don't bring anyone. But if I tell them you're my ex, she continued, like she hadn't heard me, it explains why we live together. It explains why you're there. It explains why we're close. Nobody interrogates an ex the same way they interrogate a new boyfriend, because an ex isn't a threat to manage. He's just a story that already happened. We can say we dated for a year, it ended fine, we stayed close, decided to keep splitting rent because it made sense. Nobody asks an ex about a 5-year plan. I stared at her. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about this since April. Maddie, that's an unbelievably specific lie. It's not a lie, it's a narrative. It is extremely a lie. She gave me the look she usually saved for when I argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash, the one that meant she'd already decided she was right and was simply waiting for me to catch up. Think about it from the family side. They already half expect to hear about my dating life whether I want them to or not. If I show up with a guy and say nothing, they'll assume we're together and ask 100 questions I don't want to answer in front of Trevor. If I show up with you and say you're my ex, it explains everything that's already true. We do live together. We are close. It just reframes the timeline a little. A little. A medium amount. I should have said no. I want to be honest about that, because saying yes wasn't some heroic decision. It wasn't me bravely stepping up to protect my roommate from family pressure out of pure selfless loyalty. Some smaller, more selfish part of me said yes, because it meant an entire afternoon of being allowed to stand close to her, put a hand on her back, finish her sentences, and have everyone around us simply accept it as fact instead of wondering what it meant. It was permission to act like something I'd been pretending I didn't want to be. Fine, I said. I'll be your ex. Maddie's whole face changed, relief flooding in so fast it almost looked like something else. Thank you. Seriously. You have no idea what this takes off my plate. What's our story? I feel like I need the lore before I show up improvising in front of your Aunt Pam. She hopped down from the counter, suddenly energized, like we were planning a heist instead of a barbecue. Okay. We met 2 years ago, obviously, since that's true. We dated for about a year. It ended mutually, no drama. We just realized we worked better as friends. We decided staying roommates made sense because neither of us wanted to deal with finding new apartments in this market, which is also true because nobody wants to deal with this housing market. So the actual facts of our living situation stay the same. We just insert a relationship in the middle of it. Exactly. Minimal lying. Maximum efficiency. What ended it? In the story, I mean. She thought about it for a second. tapping her chin. We grew apart. That's vague enough that nobody can poke holes in it, and specific enough that it sounds real. Solid. Very Hallmark. I learned from the best. She grinned at me, and something about the easy, conspiratorial warmth of that grin made the whole ridiculous plan feel less like a favor and more like an inside joke only the two of us were allowed to have, which, looking back, might have been exactly the problem. We spent the rest of that week rehearsing details the way actors learn lines, except the script was our own actual life with one fictional relationship dropped into the middle of it like a guest star. Our first date, according to the story, was at the taco place 2 blocks from our apartment because Maddie said if anyone asked for specifics, it had to be somewhere we'd both actually been so we wouldn't trip over details. Our first fight, in the story, was about her leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor. Because that was a real ongoing grievance she clearly still needed to air even inside a fictional relationship. I told her if we were going to invent a whole romantic history, I at least deserved to win one argument in it, so we agreed the towel issue ended with her conceding I had a point, which she informed me was the single most unrealistic part of the entire story. By the time Saturday came, we had a backstory more detailed than some actual relationships I'd had. We knew our fake anniversary. We knew our fake breakup conversation, which Maddie insisted needed to sound mature and amicable, like 2 emotionally evolved adults, not messy or bitter, because messy invited follow-up questions and amicable invited none. We knew that if anyone asked why we still lived together despite dating and breaking up, the answer was always some version of, honestly, it just made more sense than moving, delivered with a shrug. Because nothing shuts down a nosy relative faster than a shrug that implies the topic is boring. What we hadn't rehearsed, what no amount of planning could have prepared either of us for, was how it would actually feel to perform that story in front of people who loved her, surrounded by 20 years of family history I had no real part in, with an actual ex standing 30 feet away taking mental notes. Renee's backyard was the kind of overcrowded, over-decorated chaos that only happens when a family decides one barbecue should also function as a reunion, a birthday celebration for someone's toddler, and an unofficial dating status check-in. All at once. String lights crossed overhead even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Someone's uncle had set up a cornhole tournament with a bracket taped to a folding table like it was March Madness. The smell of grilled meat mixed with sunscreen and the specific perfume cloud that only exists when at least 4 women over 50 stand near each other at the same family event. Maddie squeezed my hand once before we walked through the gate, quick and tight, the kind of squeeze that means brace yourself. Last chance to back out, she said. And let Aunt Pam interrogate you alone? Absolutely not. You're a good ex, she said, deadpan, and something about hearing her call me that out loud, even as a joke, even knowing it wasn't real, landed somewhere in my chest with more weight than I expected. The first 20 minutes went almost exactly the way Maddie predicted. Her mother spotted us at the gate and made a sound somewhere between surprise and triumph, the universal noise mothers make when they see 2 people they've decided should be together standing next to each other. Well, look who it is, she said, hugging Maddie, then turning to hug me with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for someone she'd already mentally cast in a future family photo. Eli. It's been ages. Good to see you, Linda, I said, and the lie came out easier than I expected, smooth, almost natural, which should have worried me more than it did. You 2 look good together, Linda said, glancing between us with the satisfaction of a woman solving a puzzle she'd been working on for months. Are you too? We're just here together, Mom. Maddie cut in smoothly, exactly on script. You know, since we still live together and everything. Right? Linda nodded like this answered the question, even though it absolutely hadn't. Well, it's nice. You 2 are always good for each other. That sentence stuck with me longer than it should have, mostly because it was supposed to be about a relationship that never existed, and yet it landed like it was describing something completely real. By the time we'd made it past the gate, past the cornhole bracket, past a cousin I was introduced to as Eli, you remember Eli, even though I'd apparently never met this particular cousin in my life, I started to understand what Maddie meant about the difference between introducing a boyfriend and an ex. Nobody grilled me. Nobody asked about my 5-year plan. People treated me less like a stranger to be evaluated and more like a known quantity, a character who already had a settled role in the family's understanding of Maddie's life. It was, I had to admit, a genuinely brilliant piece of social engineering. The trouble started with Aunt Pam, because of course it did. She found us near the drink cooler, holding a plate of something suspiciously beige, and looked between us with the sharp, delighted curiosity of a woman who lived for exactly this kind of material. "So you two broke up," she said, not quite a question, more an opening statement, "and you still live together. And you came to a family party together." "It's not that complicated, Aunt Pam," Maddie said, reaching for the script we'd built. "We grew apart. It was mutual. The lease made more sense to keep than to break." "Mutual," Aunt Pam repeated, the way you'd repeat a word you didn't quite believe. "Mutual breakups are very rare, sweetheart. Usually one person grows apart and the other person just goes along with it to save face." "Well, this was the rare kind," I said, stepping in, partly to take some heat off Maddie and partly because something in me did not love the implication that I'd been the one dragging my feet in a fictional breakup I'd invented 8 days earlier. "We just realized somewhere along the way we were better as friends. It happens." Aunt Pam studied me like she could see through both the story and the shirt I was wearing. "And there's no chance you two might find your way back to each other? You seem awfully comfortable for two people who grew apart." I felt Maddie go very slightly still beside me. "We're happy how things are," Maddie said, a beat too quickly. Aunt Pam smiled in that way older relatives smile when they've decided not to push further, but absolutely have not let go of the theory. "If you say so." We escaped toward the food table, and once we were a safe distance away, Maddie exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire encounter. "That woman has the investigative instincts of a federal agent and the subtlety of a foghorn." "You good?" "Fine. It's fine. It's just," she glanced over her shoulder, toward the part of the yard where I could now see Trevor standing near the dessert table, tall, tan, wearing the kind of fitted button-down that announces a man has recently discovered a gym, with a woman beside him I assumed was the med school girlfriend, laughing at something he'd said with the slightly performative enthusiasm of someone who hadn't quite earned her own opinions in the relationship yet. "He's already here. Want to avoid him?" "No," Maddie said, straightening her shoulders in a way that made my chest ache a little with something close to pride. "I want to walk past him looking like I'm doing great." "You are doing great." She looked at me sideways. "I have a fake ex-boyfriend at a family barbecue. I'm not sure great is the word. Fake ex-boyfriend who's still here, still helping, still your favorite person at this entire party," I said. "That's pretty great, if you ask me." Something flickered across her face, quick and unreadable, before she covered it with a laugh. "Don't get full of yourself." "Never." Trevor noticed us before we reached the dessert table, which I suspected was less coincidence and more the result of him keeping at least one eye on the gate all afternoon, waiting for exactly this kind of entrance. His expression did a complicated thing when he saw me beside Maddie, landing somewhere between confusion and the kind of forced neutrality men perform when they're trying very hard not to look bothered. "Maddie," he said, leaning in for a hug she allowed but didn't really return. "You look good." "Thanks. So do you, Trevor." Her voice was perfectly pleasant, which somehow made it more devastating than if she'd been cold. His eyes shifted to me, and I watched him try to place me, that specific flicker of someone running facial recognition on a person they've definitely seen photos of but never actually met. "And you're Eli," I said, extending a hand. "Maddie's roommate." I watched Maddie's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly at the word roommate, like some instinct told her the truth, even the half-truth, undersold what we were supposed to be selling, and a second later she corrected it herself, easy and casual. "Eli's actually my ex," she said, like she was mentioning the weather. "We dated for a while, broke up, decided the apartment was worth keeping anyway." Trevor's whole posture changed, subtly, in the way a man's posture changes when he's recalculating a situation he thought he understood. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize you were seeing someone after." "After you," Maddie said, finishing his sentence with a directness that made his girlfriend glance up with sudden interest. "Yeah, life kept happening, Trevor." Funny how that works. I had to bite back a laugh, because the line was good, sharp without being cruel, the kind of thing you only think to say in the shower 3 days after you actually needed it, except Maddie had it loaded and ready in real time, which told me she'd been thinking about this conversation for a lot longer than April. Trevor's girlfriend extended a hand toward Maddie with the bright, slightly nervous energy of someone who'd clearly been told a sanitized version of this history. I'm Priya. It's nice to finally meet you. Trevor's told me a lot about you. Has he? Maddie said, polite, unreadable. All good things, Priya added quickly, the kind of reassurance that somehow makes everyone in earshot more suspicious instead of less. I'm sure, Maddie said, then turned slightly toward me, her hand finding the curve of my elbow with a kind of practiced ease that made my pulse do something embarrassing. We should go say hi to Renee before the toddler situation gets out of hand. You know how kids get around cake. Of course, I said, letting her steer me away, feeling Trevor's eyes on us the entire walk across the yard. Once we were out of earshot, Maddie dropped her hand from my arm and let out a long breath, shaking her head like she was trying to physically dislodge the last 5 minutes. I forgot how much I hate that smile he does. I'm being so mature about this smile. It makes my teeth itch. You handled it well. I had backup, she said, glancing at me, and there was something warmer underneath the joke this time, something that made the comment land less like a throwaway line and more like an actual thank you. The afternoon went on like that for a while, a slow rotation of relatives, plates of food, a cornhole game I lost badly enough that one of Maddie's cousins started calling me the liability, and a steady undercurrent of people watching the two of us a little too closely, drawing their own conclusions despite the story we'd carefully constructed to discourage exactly that. We fell into a rhythm without meaning to, the kind of rhythm that comes from 2 years of actually knowing each other, not from a script we'd rehearsed for a week. I knew when she wanted to leave a conversation before she said anything, just from the way her weight shifted onto one foot. She knew when I was bored, because apparently I have a very specific face for it that she described as polite hostage. We finished each other's sentences twice without trying, which earned us a knowing look from her mother both times. It was easy. That was the part that scared me, somewhere around hour 3, standing near the fence while Maddie laughed at something her cousin said, the late afternoon light doing something unfair and golden to the side of her face. It wasn't hard to play her ex-boyfriend. It wasn't hard at all. The performance kept slipping into something that didn't feel performed. The moment that cracked everything open happened near the end of the party, when Renee, slightly buzzed off 2 mimosas and emboldened by the general looseness of the afternoon, cornered us by the dessert table with the specific brand of nosiness only family members at a barbecue can manufacture. Okay, I have to ask, Renee said, gesturing between us with her cup, because I've been watching you two all day, and I have a theory. Oh no, Maddie said. Renee has a theory. My theory, Renee continued, undeterred, is that you two never actually stopped liking each other, and this whole "we grew apart, we're just friends now" thing is a story you tell yourselves so you don't have to admit you're both still into it. The dessert table went very quiet, at least the part of it occupied by the 3 of us. That's not, Maddie started. Because I watched Eli grab you a chair before you even asked for one, Renee said, ticking points off like she was building a legal case. I watched you laugh at his joke about the cornhole bracket before he even finished the sentence. I watched him hand you a napkin the second your hands got messy without you saying a word. That's not "we grew apart" behavior, Maddie. That's married couple behavior. That's the behavior of people who've been doing this so long they don't even notice they're doing it anymore. I opened my mouth to deflect, to deploy some version of the script we'd practiced, and found, for the first time all day, that I had absolutely nothing prepared, because everything Renee had just said was true, and it had nothing to do with the story we'd invented. Maddie laughed it off, eventually, with a line about old habits and 2 years of practice reading each other's moods, and Renee accepted it with a kind of skeptical shrug that meant she wasn't actually convinced, but had decided to let it go for now. But something about the exchange sat differently with both of us for the rest of the afternoon. We got quieter. Not awkward, exactly, just careful, like we'd both noticed the same loose thread and were each privately deciding whether to pull it. We left a little before sunset, After the obligatory round of goodbyes that takes 45 minutes longer at a family party than it should, after Linda hugged me again and said, "Don't be a stranger, Eli, even if you two aren't, you know." With a wink that made Maddie groan into my shoulder, after Trevor gave us a stiff nod from across the yard that Maddie returned with significantly more satisfaction than the moment probably deserved. The drive home was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that comes after performing for several hours, your body finally allowed to stop holding a shape it had been holding all day. The sun was low enough to turn the windshield gold, and Maddie had her knees pulled up against the dashboard the way she always sat in the car, shoes off, like the act of driving anywhere automatically meant getting comfortable. "That went better than I expected," she said finally, breaking the silence somewhere around the second stoplight. "You think?" "Aunt Pam basically deposed you near the cooler." "Aunt Pam deposes everyone. It's how she shows love." She glanced over at me, the gold light catching the side of her face the same unfair way it had at the party. "You were really good today, you know. Like, genuinely good." I almost believed our own story a couple times. "I had a great writer," I said. "The towel argument was a stroke of genius." I stand by the towel argument. She was quiet for a second, looking out the window at the houses sliding by, streetlights starting to flicker on one by one. Renee's theory was annoying. "Which part?" "The married couple behavior part." She said it lightly, but there was something underneath it, something testing the air to see how I'd respond before she committed to whatever she actually wanted to say. "She wasn't wrong, though," I said, before I could stop myself, before the more careful part of my brain could intervene and steer the sentence somewhere safer. "We've been doing the chair thing and the napkin thing for 2 years. We just never had an audience analyzing it before." Maddie didn't say anything for a long moment. The car slowed at a red light, and in the stillness of waiting for it to change, she turned her head toward me fully. "Can I tell you something that's going to sound insane?" she said. "After today, my bar for insane is pretty high." I didn't have to pretend much. She said it quietly, almost like she was testing whether the words would survive being spoken out loud. All day, the whole story, the script. I kept waiting for it to feel like a performance, like I was acting, and it just didn't. Not really. Not after the first 10 minutes. The light turned green. I didn't move the car forward right away. "What are you saying, Maddie?" She let out a breath that sounded like it had been building for longer than the drive, maybe longer than the party, maybe longer than the week we'd spent rehearsing a relationship that apparently wasn't entirely fiction to begin with. "I'm saying that telling everyone you were my ex today was the easiest lie I've ever told, because somewhere in the last 2 years, without either of us deciding to, you stopped being just my roommate. And I've known that for a while. I just didn't know how to say it without making everything weird." Someone behind us honked, gently, reminding us the light had been green for several seconds. I pulled forward, found a spot to pull over at the next side street instead of driving straight home, because this did not feel like a conversation that should happen at 25 miles an hour with my hands on a steering wheel and my eyes on the road instead of on her. "Maddie," I said, once the car was stopped, once it was just the two of us and the quiet hum of the engine and the streetlight outside throwing soft orange light across the dashboard. "I said yes to today for a reason that had nothing to do with helping you avoid Aunt Pam." She turned fully toward me, one knee still pulled up on the seat, her expression caught somewhere between hope and the particular fear of hoping too soon. "What reason?" "Because it meant I got to act like the thing I've wanted to be for longer than I've let myself admit, and have everyone just accept it instead of asking questions I didn't have honest answers to yet." I reached over, slow enough to give her every chance to pull away if I'd read this wrong, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face the same easy way I'd been doing it in character all afternoon, except this time there was no audience, no script, no Renee watching from across a backyard. I've spent 2 years calling it nothing because nothing felt safer than risking what we already had. And now? Now I think pretending to be your ex for one afternoon showed me exactly how much I don't want to be or anything that requires the word ex eventually. Maddie's breath caught, soft and audible in the quiet car, and the look on her face was the one I'd been quietly cataloging for 2 years without naming it, the real one, not the polite one she handed out to strangers and distant relatives. That was annoyingly smooth for someone who spent the entire party pretending to be bad at flirting. I wasn't pretending. I'm just better under pressure. She laughed, the real laugh, the one I'd know anywhere, and then she leaned across the small space between the seats and kissed me, soft and certain, the kind of kiss that answers a question instead of asking one. When she pulled back, just far enough to look at me properly, her hand still resting against my jaw, she said it again, quieter this time, like she finally trusted the words enough to repeat them. I really didn't have to pretend much. I noticed. You should have said something sooner. You should have, I said. You're the one who wrote the script. I wrote a script about an ex-boyfriend who grew apart from me amicably, she said. I did not write a script where the ex-boyfriend turns out to be the actual plot twist. Plot twists are my specialty. Clearly. We sat there for a while longer than the drive strictly required, parked on a quiet side street 2 miles from the apartment we'd been sharing as something less than what we apparently both wanted, talking through everything we'd been too careful to say for 2 years. Filling in all the blank space underneath the jokes and the late-night kitchen conversations and the small, unconscious gestures Renee had clocked faster than either of us had let ourselves. The first week after the barbecue was its own strange kind of adjustment, because it's one thing to admit feelings in a parked car under a streetlight, and another thing entirely to figure out how two people who've spent 2 years building an entire functional, comfortable life as roommates suddenly fold something new into that life without breaking what already worked. We were careful with each other in a way we hadn't been before, almost shy, like neither of us wanted to move too fast and accidentally prove Aunt Pam's earlier theory about people going along with things just to save face. But it didn't take long for careful to turn back into easy, the same easy we'd always had, just with the added permission to reach for her hand on the couch, or for her to fall asleep against my shoulder during a movie instead of pretending she wasn't tired. There was a stretch in the middle of that adjustment, though, that almost knocked the whole thing sideways, and it had nothing to do with either of us losing our nerve. It had to do with Trevor, because of course it did. About 3 weeks after the barbecue, before we'd told anyone outside that parked car what had actually changed between us, Trevor texted Maddie out of nowhere. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could screenshot and use as evidence of anything, just a message that said he'd been thinking about her, that he hoped things were going well, that maybe they should grab coffee sometime as friends, obviously, just to catch up. Maddie showed it to me the second it came in, phone held out like the thing might be contagious, and I watched her face do a complicated dance between irritation and something I couldn't quite name. You don't have to show me that, I said, even though I was glad she had. I want to show you that, she said. I don't want there to be a version of us where I start hiding texts, because I'm worried about what they'll start. Are you going to go? No. She said it immediately, without the half-second of consideration I'd half-braced for. I'm not interested in catching up with Trevor. I spent 3 years catching up to whatever version of myself he wanted, and I'm not doing a reunion tour. She set the phone down on the counter, screen dark, like she was closing a door on purpose. I just didn't want you to find out about the text some other way and wonder why I didn't mention it. That mattered more than she probably realized, because the easiest way to ruin something new is to let old habits of secrecy sneak back in under the excuse of keeping the peace, and Maddie had clearly decided she wasn't doing that this time, with this person. She wrote back a short, polite, completely unambiguous message declining the coffee, and didn't hear from him again for months, which told me everything I needed to know about how much of that text had actually been about catching up. It would have been easy, after something like that, to let a small flicker of doubt creep in, the kind that makes you wonder if you're a placeholder for something a person hasn't fully let go of yet. I didn't, not really, not for longer than the length of that one conversation, because watching her close her phone the way she did told me more than any reassurance could have. Some people perform security. Maddie just had it. The kind that doesn't need an audience to prove itself, the kind Renee had accidentally spotted across a backyard full of potato salad weeks, before either of us had spotted it ourselves. We told our actual friends within the month, mostly because Maddie's best friend Diane noticed the shift in about 4 minutes flat and refused to let either of us leave the room until we admitted what had changed. Telling Maddie's family took longer, partly because Maddie wanted to control the timeline herself instead of letting Renee's barbecue grapevine handle it for us, which it absolutely would have, given enough time and enough mimosas. The actual reveal happened, fittingly, at another family gathering, this time a smaller one, just a Sunday dinner at Linda's house a couple months later. When Linda asked, half teasing, whether Eli was still coming around as the famous ex, Maddie set down her fork, looked at her mother with the same steady directness she'd used on Trevor at the barbecue, and said, "Actually, that part wasn't entirely true. We weren't exes. We just told everyone that because it was easier than explaining we hadn't figured out what we actually were yet." She reached for my hand under the table. "We've figured it out now." Linda's face did something complicated, somewhere between confusion at being lied to and pure delight at the actual news, before she landed firmly on delight, hugging us both so hard I nearly knocked over a water glass. "I knew it," she said. "I knew the whole grew apart thing didn't add up. You two never once looked like people who'd grown apart." Even Aunt Pam, when she eventually heard the real story secondhand through the family group chat, sent a single text that read, "Told you," with no further elaboration, which Maddie said was the closest Aunt Pam had ever come to issuing a formal apology. Trevor's reaction, when it eventually filtered back to us through Renee, who heard it through Priya, who apparently heard it directly from Trevor, was less generous, something about how he always thought there was something going on there. Delivered with the specific bitterness of a man realizing the woman he'd once made feel small was now visibly, thoroughly happy without him. Maddie laughed for a full minute when she heard that one. A year after the barbecue, we moved out of the apartment we'd lived in as roommates and into a slightly bigger one a few blocks over, still splitting rent, still arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. Except now it was a different kind of argument, the kind that ends with someone losing on purpose, because losing means getting the better end of a different deal entirely. Renee still brings up her theory every chance she gets, insisting at every family event since that she called it first, technically before either of us had called it ourselves, which is a claim Maddie disputes loudly and which I privately think might actually be true. 2 years after the day I stood in her cousin's backyard pretending to be her ex-boyfriend, I asked Maddie to marry me in that same backyard, during that same barbecue, while Renee's string lights buzzed faintly overhead in the late afternoon heat, because it felt right to finish the story exactly where it had started going sideways in the best possible way. She said yes before I'd even fully gotten the question out, which she still insists doesn't count as cheating, and I still insist absolutely does. When people ask how we got together now, Maddie usually starts the story the same way every time. "I asked him to pretend to be my ex at a family party," she says, "so my family would stop asking when I was getting back out there." Then she looks at me, and I finish it the way I always do. "And on the drive home, she told me she didn't have to pretend much. Turns out neither did I." So tell me, what would you have done if your roommate asked you to play pretend at a family party, and somewhere in the middle of the performance, you realized you weren't acting anymore? And have you ever found out, the hard way or the good way, that the story you were telling other people turned out to be truer than the one you were telling yourself? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.